Okay, well, lovely. Well, thank you ever so much for coming along today. So I appreciate the intention behind this event was to get everybody in a room together to, I suppose, commune with our colleagues and associates across the qualitative ecosystem and so get back to real life. Obviously, climate and weather has got in the way of that. So hearty apologies for having to stare at a screen for yet another hour or so after a long day. The topic for us today is about, I suppose, examining staff recruitment for qualitative research. So really this event aims to answer a single question. So what can we do to improve the recruitment process? How can we do things better? And we're really focusing on issues which uniquely affect qualitative research. So the situation is quite dynamic. So we first mooted this session at the end of last year. So we'd had a number of sessions with leaders of different qualitative ecosystem organizations across the spectrum. And one consistent theme that came back from members and member firms was that it's difficult to find candidates. The whole experience of 2021 post-pandemic, the Great Resignation was challenging for a lot of different parties. People were reassessing what was important to them. So people were changing careers, people were prioritizing different things. Sometimes we had somebody in our organization going off to become a midwife, exchanging qualitative research to become a midwife, for example. So people really taking quite drastic pivots and changing what they were doing for a living. Since then, so since we talked about this end of 2021 and first got the event going, things have moved a bit. And one of the questions I had, and one of the things that hopefully will come out around the debate was, has the wind changed? So are we seeing the great return following the Great Resignation? Are people reassessing their decisions? Are people focusing on paying the mortgage as a priority as our economic headwinds sort of pick up and we're facing a cost of living crisis? So is the pendulum swinging a bit more back from the employee back to the employer, for example? Who knows? I'm really interested to discuss these things with people and find out what people think. So, as I briefly mentioned before, we have some outstanding panelists. So, experienced, opinionated, charismatic, and I'll get them to introduce themselves in a second. But I briefly wanted to kind of name check them all one by one. So, Charlene Adamah from Schlesinger Group. We've got Liz Norman, founder of Elizabeth Norman International. We've got Brooke Ramsdale from Ipsos, who's head of qualitative there. And we've got Sarah Grace, who's HR manager at Trinity McQueen. So I want to thank them before I forget for taking part and helping us elucidate these really interesting topics by way of discussion. So it's really great that they could take part. So they're all going to introduce themselves in a second and outline their view on something they think is important. Just want to say, I want to keep structured to the discussion. So I've got 5 key themes that we're exploring, and they touch on some of the interesting sort of aspects around staff recruitments within qualitative research. And as I said, we'll break into some breakout rooms after about 45 minutes to think about solutions. So I'm really keen for this to be a strategic, future-focused, solution-oriented session. And as part of that, we'll get people to present back. We'll be taking notes, we'll be taking names, we'll be taking actions. So we'll want the outcome of this to be action. So the industry taking action, individuals taking action, and your job is to keep us honest. So we will report back in the In Brief magazine. So I have wanged on for a bit. I'll stop sharing my screen because that's a bit of a barrier between us and the discussion. So hopefully everybody can see everybody now. So I wanted to start off with just handing over to each of our panelists just to introduce themselves and maybe just tell us for a minute or so their view on something that's particularly important to them about this discussion. So I was going to ask Charlene, would you be okay to start us off? Are you happy to do that? Is that okay?
Happy to do that. Thank you for having me. So, as Simon said, I'm Charlene. I work at Schlesinger Group, but I'm also a co-founder of Colour of Research. So, a lot of people probably won't be surprised to see that one of the things that I'd probably like to discuss today, and one of the challenges I think we face in terms of recruitment in research would probably be that of ethnicity, diversity, both at a entry level and also recruiting for various other levels within companies. And I sort of look forward to discussing that today and perhaps some of the things that we could do to tackle it.
Well, thank you ever so much, Charlene. And that's one of our 5 themes that we really wanted to pick up. Obviously, we could spend an entire session focusing on that because it's so important, strategic. But we'll come back to that to pick it apart shortly. Next on my screen, I can see most closely to you is Liz. So Liz, please, would you like to go next? Is that okay?
Yeah. So I'm Liz Norman. I'm the founder of ENI. I've been recruiting for the insight profession for 37 years. It's always been talent short. It's particularly talent short now. And I know, because I do quite a lot of work on more general recruitment bodies, that we're not expecting that to reverse for about a couple of years, Simon. So no sign of the pendulum swinging back yet, I'm afraid.
Right.
My particular thing is that I think the question, how do you improve the recruitment process, isn't the right question. I think that there are things, of course, there are things that we could do to improve the process, but you've got to be very careful. If you improve the process with us between me and a specific company, all you're doing is encouraging me to rob Peter to pay Paul. I mean, there is no benefit for the industry as a whole if I get a better relationship with Ipsos and take them from Kantar. You know, that's no good. So I'm very much in Charlene's camp. I think the only way to tackle this is to think imaginatively about how we improve the pool of talent as a whole. And that includes ethnicity, but there are other things. I think we're ageist as an industry and we lose a lot of older people. We're not good enough. We go out to universities, but there aren't enough graduate schemes. What are we doing? There's still an issue, and it's been an issue ever since I've been in recruitment, about supporting and encouraging mothers to go back to work. And then there is the whole sort of, it's ethnicity, it's diversity in other ways. I'm very interested in neurodiversity. And, you know, what are we doing that's a huge pool of talent that is not employed. What are we doing to encourage those sorts of people into this sort of profession? Can I cheat? And that's my point. But Richard Jenkins, who's also here, who works with me, a few people know him, I'm sure. I discussed this with him and he had a separate point, which is you need to think about attrition. Nowadays, qualitative researchers can go into such a wide range of roles. They can do cultural insight, futures. There's a lot moving into user research, which is a massive and growing area. There is an increasing number of qualitative roles on the client side, which we never saw before. So you've also got an issue that you're losing them. And so it's not just about encouraging them, it's also to think about how to stop losing them.
Got you. Brilliant. Right, I'm going to step in there before you continue your wonderful flow, Liz. Lots of different points to pick up on there, and fabulous, lots of different points to pick up. So thank you for that. Sarah, you're next on my screen. Are you okay going next and sort of introducing yourself and telling us what your view is?
Yeah, so I'm Sarah, I'm the HR manager at Trinity McQueen. I've worked in HR since about 2009, but joined Trinity McQueen in March of last year, so kind of towards the tail end coming out of pandemic sort of thing. So I would say this is probably the hardest I've worked from an attraction point of view. I feel like the first 12 months of my role has been talent manager sort of thing, you know, attracting people to the business. I would say that biggest challenge around that recruitment was obviously kind of my big focus over the last 12 months. But so much time and energy goes into recruiting these people. I want to retain them as well, and that's really important to me. So we've done loads at Trinity McQueen around that. But when you are losing them to a different industry, like Simon had said, whether it's to midwifery or to the civil service, whether it's the Ministry of Justice, client side, all that sort of stuff, that's the real challenge of why, you know, we want to keep people agency side, really. So that's the big focus for me.
That's really interesting, your perspective there, Sarah. Thank you so much. And then Brooke, finally, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us your big theme?
Absolutely. So my name is Brooke Ramsdale. I lead the qualitative practice for Ipsos. It is a very large practice. We have about 9 different specialist qual teams, and there's about, I think it's closely approximating about 200 dedicated full-time qualitative researchers. So for us, it's quantity. You know, the pace of our growth, trying to keep pace with it, you know, the industry just doesn't supply as many researchers as we need, where we have no problem attracting great grads. We train them, we have an excellent training program, that's fine when we're building from the bottom, but it's at more senior levels where, honestly, the best we've been able to come up with is recruiting from abroad. It's given us a very diverse team, which is fantastic, but yeah, finding local talent to build at that pace is a big challenge for us.
Really interesting. So I'm sure you all agree we've got such a diversity of experience on our panel. So we've got smaller firms, large firms, as we've just seen, and we've got I suppose a range of different views relating to strategic changes to how we affect our industry and grow in the right way. So it's going to be a fascinating discussion. So the first theme I wanted to pick up on, and this is for anybody on the panel to get us started. So the first theme is, are we getting the best talent? And I think we've gone some way to answering that question there. So I suppose the question I wanted to get us going with is, what do people think about the flow of new blood into the industry? So who wants to start me off?
I'm quite happy to, because I think similarly to Brooke there with regards to grads, you know, Trinity McQueen had a big push on grads last summer, and we got some amazing talent coming through. I think even some of our very seasoned researchers were almost amazed at the calibre of the people coming through, off things like the behavioural science masters, all of that sort of stuff. So I think we've done really well there, because I think you know, it's no secret that the research industry have struggled over the last couple of years for that, like SRE, you know, couple of years experience, because people weren't recruiting, you know, during the pandemic. So we've very much taken that approach of growing our own. And I think I don't know if we have been lucky or not, but I think we've got some amazing grads, you know, really keen to really interested in the world and, you know, how people do things and all that sort of stuff, and, you know, and approaching things in a really different way. So I think we've done quite well, and Simon obviously would be testament to that as well, working with them on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and we're a sort of small to medium-sized firm. So to contrast that with Brooke, so your experiences, so a team of 200 qualies split across 9 teams, and that's huge super tanker in comparison to little elders. So, you know, talk to us a little bit about the flow of new talent into the industry, the sort of the green shoots, I can't mix in all my metaphors here, but the new blood. Tell us about that.
As I said, the graduate sort of program that we have has been excellent. And so I think, you know, we really don't have any trouble attracting grads. We have a great training program. So you know, building from the base is not problematic. But when you're growing, you know, we've also been growing at a really fast pace across all of these different teams. And so we're looking for specialist experts in very specific sector and methodological expert areas. And when you get into the senior levels, so many qualies choose to go freelance at some point in their career. And so that gives us a dearth of people, full stop, never mind trying to zoom in on these sector specialisms. Now, if anyone is going to train these grads and lead these businesses, we need to be able to grow at more senior levels as well as more junior levels. And that is, we have found that problematic, and we have attracted from client side. We have attracted certainly international talent, which has been fantastic. But keeping pace, it's quite tricky.
Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, well, I was going to say I've got a slightly different perspective, because I do quite a lot of the graduate talks for SMR. So I go around the universities talking to students to try and encourage them to go into insight, both qual and quant and everything else. And I think what I find frustrating is that you should see the number of people that contact me, so many students. And I'm sure Brooke, you would testify, I bet you get loads of applicants. Loads and loads of people want to go into the profession. And whilst there are some companies that do run very good graduate training programs, the industry as a whole doesn't really. And you can't rely on people like Ipsos to train all your graduates and then nick them. I mean, that's just, it's not fair.
Thank you.
First point of agreement amongst the panel, tick. So Liz, I just wanted to pick up on that point. So, you know, so not naming names, but if you had to kind of talk, if you think about the structure of the industry, we've got some really big players at the top, and then we've got a multitude of one-man bands and smaller firms, one-person bands, you know, smaller companies, but there's that distribution of organizations. So what could be improved? What type of firm needs to do a better graduate training scheme, for example? What's your view?
There are lots and lots of very small companies in qualitative research, and it's very hard for them to take on large numbers of graduates. So there aren't that many real sizable companies involved with qualitative research, actually. The vast majority are small, and the only thing I can think is maybe AQR gets together and does some sort of graduate program across AQR, supporting lots of smaller companies, because it's so hard for them to do it by themselves. The other thing, actually, I'd just quickly mention, which is a bit of a bugbear of mine, when I do these talks, I see a massively diverse range of students come along. We don't do very much graduate recruitment, so the next time I see them is at sort of a year, 2-year level. And they've magically appeared to suddenly become, I don't know if this is politically correct, but white middle class, when actually the people that I was presenting to as students were a very wide range. And I don't know how that happens. But
Can I jump in there, please, for a second? First of all, thank you for helping us. It sounds like your spruiking at universities has helped generate kind of, you know, more people coming to us, which I think is brilliant. So thank you for that. The second thing I just wanted to add was that, interestingly, when we lose some grads who obviously don't follow through, you know, all the way through to director, we don't tend, it's actually the rarity that we lose them to another research agency. It's usually another part of our business, because it's a very large business, or it's a change of career. They make a sidestep, they go client side, they go into consultancy, something like that. They go back to university. It's not that often that we're losing them elsewhere. So much as I'd love to shake a stick and say everyone's nicking out trained grads, it's not really the experience that we've had. And the final point was on the diversity piece. We introduced, a couple of years ago, we work with a company called Instant Impact, who do blind recruitment specifically at the entry level. It's trickier to deal with at more senior levels, but we've done that for all entry level positions across the business for some time now. And it has changed things drastically, I must say, but we do often, it's quite challenging because it's only blind to a certain point. And I think, you know, picking up on the earlier point about neurodiversity, etc., I think that there's still more that we need to do to not be filtering people out in the process. It's all very well to encourage people through the system with blind recruitment practices, but you don't want to be filtering people out for sort of different perspectives and neurodiversity and all of these other factors. But it has changed significantly. And when we look at our ethnicity across the different levels, at the grassroots levels, at GRE, RE, SRE, where we've had this put in place, it's changed completely, and it's even more representative than the London statistics for minority groups. Senior levels, it's going to take a little longer.
Yeah,
good. Sounds brilliant. I'll ask you about that separately.
Did anybody else want to come in on that point there in terms of the grads or the people doing a university presentation? There's quite a range of people represented. Yet when somebody joins, the people that actually end up joining are more homogenous. Did anybody else want to come in on that point? Okay.
If no one's jumping in, I'll throw another thought in there, which is
all right.
I think we've done a really good job in getting more sort of diverse applicants through. As I said, there's still more to be done on neurodiverse, etc. But I still think there's something to be done around class. I think it is such a middle class industry, and it is such a left wing industry. And I think we need all political perspectives. We need all perspectives on life, and we need all people from all classes if we're going to have really honest research, objective research, and I think that's a challenge for us.
But I think that's a point I was sort of going to make, actually, because we've been placing a lot of emphasis, and I saw that Ella said mention this as well, on graduate schemes. And yeah, they can be great, but as you've mentioned, Brooke, it's very middle class, and doesn't that sort of ring true of why that may be a bit of an issue, graduate schemes?
Ours isn't. Sorry, Charlene, I should say, we don't call it graduate anymore. We call it early careers because it includes non-graduates, and we're getting to the point where we're going to be approaching as many non-graduates as graduates entering in the same process.
And that's probably why you are probably seeing more diversity, whereas a lot of other companies that's not necessarily the case. They have a lot of graduates. You have to be from certain universities even, and then when that happens, you instantly have some people that obviously haven't been to university. There's a lot of, you know, working class people that can't necessarily afford to go to university that have great minds that we're sort of missing out on in the industry. And yeah, I think that we sort of can be missing a trick there in some places.
Yeah, and that was a point I was going to pick up on, actually. Ella was telling me off in the comments, and that was actually my very next probe, Ella, that around, are we doing all we can around different points of entry into the industry? So there are other routes other than graduates into the industry. So Charlene, did you want to pick up on that point? Have you from your perspective, have you seen any great success stories where there have been other entry points other than just grads?
Definitely. So apprenticeship schemes, and I know people that have entered into the industry through apprenticeship schemes and flying, just doing amazingly, not through the traditional graduate scheme route, but have been nurtured that way, and it's really helped. And yeah, they are from ethnic backgrounds, various just diversities in general, not just ethnicity. It's just a good way to get more people into the industry. And I think it's great, Brooke, as you said, that you're moving away from that traditional graduation route. Obviously you go to university and in some cases study this and deserve to get a position, but it's just that it's not the only way to recruit great talent. So yeah,
understood. Does anybody else want to pick up on the apprenticeship point?
Sorry, go on.
No.
Sorry, do you want to start?
No, I was just going to say, because obviously it's only recently that things like the MRS have launched the apprenticeship scheme, and I know they had to jump through loads of hoops to kind of get to that, and it hasn't been an easy one to get off the ground, which obviously I appreciate is that kind of more mixed method type researcher as well. But if there is things that the AQR could support with creating almost their own apprenticeship that kind of works alongside, or because I do think we've had apprenticeships in Trinity McQueen in different areas of the business, whether it's in the data division or operationally, and they work excellently. You know, they absolutely should be a consideration for businesses, but I think sometimes, certainly for smaller companies, and a lot of qual agencies are smaller, knowing where to start with that can be a bit of a minefield.
I would so agree. I know generally from recruitment that a lot of professional bodies have backed doing it because it's so hard for individual companies, particularly smaller ones, to do it. So I think that's a really good idea. I was just going to say that, to be fair to SMR, we are looking at doing school talks. So I was probably wrong just to say graduates. That's definitely something that we're moving on to. And also just, I mean, I'm in my 60s. I'm old enough to remember the days where most researchers were not graduates, and it worked perfectly fine. You know, there were loads of us that went up that route, and there were some great researchers that came out of it. It's a more recent thing, actually, this obsession with universities. So.
Yeah. Just to build on that point then, so what was different back then, and what led to that outcome?
Well, less people went to university. So
that's what I was thinking.
A lot less people went to university, so it was more normal to be a school leaver and looking for a job. But I think also in those days there was more in the way of field and DP, and sort of just because we didn't have as many computers. So we actually needed more people to do more of the sort of processing type things, and therefore allow people to come up through that route. Does that make sense?
I think that's going to change, though. You know, for a long time, that's been the compulsion for everybody to go to university. And I've got to be honest, I'm not sure I'm going to be suggesting my daughter goes to university. You know, increasingly the tide is turning. You know, COVID, we've seen prices go up and experience go down. And if employers like ours are increasingly, you know, opening the doors to non-graduates, I think there will be a shift.
Yeah, interesting. I wanted to just move things on to something that somebody else has, a few of you have mentioned. So other areas of, I suppose, equity, diversity and inclusion that perhaps are overlooked. So, you know, age was mentioned, class was mentioned, neurodiversity was mentioned too. So I suppose, what should we stop, start or continue doing as an industry in relation to these things? So does anybody start us off on that?
I can. So age is my thing, obviously, as I'm in my 60s. But the number of people that I see and interview who are older planners, they can never get back into advertising, qualitative researchers generally, and they really struggle to find work now. You know, they go freelance partly for a reason, and that is they don't feel that welcome in permanent roles.
So if you were to speak amongst friends, so what specific barrier can you point to which is preventing them from making that step? So what's in the way? What's the barrier?
Well, they do apply and they don't get anywhere, and then they come and moan to me about it.
Yeah, I'm asking your view. So why?
I think the industry is ageist. I genuinely think it is. And I think it's something that is not acknowledged and not talked about. It's not a fashionable area of diversity. I think part of it is justifiable in that Qual in particular has moved on massively in the last few years and become very digital. And a lot of older qualitative researchers are not digitally native. But nevertheless, there is still definitely roles that they could do, in my view.
I've got a question from the floor, but before I do that, does anybody else want to come in on that point or anything related to it?
Can I jump in there and just say that I'm not ageist, and we've hired loads of people who are, you know, quite senior. And I must say that the challenge that we've had has had nothing to do with age and everything to do with how long someone's been outside of an agency. We've had a few people who've rejoined after 20 years, you know, freelancing and working for themselves at a different pace, in a different environment, with a different number of stakeholders. And it hasn't worked out. You know, it's been really challenging for them to kind of get back into that way of working, and it's been really disappointing. And we've tried a couple of times, and we've come across that several times. I'm happy to keep trying, but there is a challenge, I think, which is correlated with age rather than because of age, which is just how long someone's been out of an agency before they come back in.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Tanya's got a question. I was just going to bring Tanya in from the floor just because I'm conscious of trying to include as many people as possible. So Tanya.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm Tanya from Naden Blair. I'm not sure if it's particularly on topic to this particular thing now, but one of the things that Liz mentioned at the beginning was mums returning to work, and flexibility or lack of flexibility, I would say, is a really big issue. The one good thing that's come out of COVID, in my opinion, is the hybrid working. So obviously people are able to work from home a lot more, if not continually, but lack of flexibility on the hours is still a real problem. They're still very much seen as a 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, Monday to Friday, and evenings and weekends for your qual field work. And I do think that if there could be more job sharing opportunities, or at least, you know, more people open to the 4 days or 5 days in 4, that would really help. But there does seem to be a real aversion to the, you know, to flexible working. And that's also why it's attracting more of the younger people than the older people, I think, you know, those that haven't yet got their families. That's just my thoughts on it. It would be really beneficial if people could rethink their way of hiring and their office hours. You know, all the mums that I've got are all saying, you know, once the kids go to bed, I can log on, I can work more, you'll still get 5 days out of me. But no, there's still this very much 9 to 6 view.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting perspective in terms of measuring how we measure people as an industry. So inputs, so being at a desk from 9 till 6 or whatever, as opposed to outputs, so what you achieve. So do it in the time that suits you, but just get the job done. I wanted to put that to the panel in terms of that theme, but also the idea perhaps of a job share. I'm not aware of many job shares in terms of the clients and agency colleagues that I know and work with. Pass it over to you guys. Who wants to come in on that?
Well, from my point of view, so I am somebody who works flexibly, a mum, all of that sort of stuff. So I have the ability to empathise, and I do think I've always worked in creative industries, and I was actually surprised from my point of view within Trinity McQueen of actually how I think we are very flexible. We have the majority of our qualies actually do our mums work 4 days a week, you know, we have, and I absolutely agree. I think COVID has almost dragged on business practices and work-life balance a good 10 years earlier than what it would have done if it had evolved naturally. I think because we all had to shift at the same time. But, you know, off the back of that, we have introduced things like the flexible times before, you know, so that you've got that flexibility of starting earlier, finishing earlier, starting later, finishing later, to try and introduce that. And I think from having spoken to lots of people during interview process over the last 12 months, them talking about that work-life balance, that's the thing that has been a barrier. You know, at Trinity McQueen, we're able to offer things like the time off in lieu, and that really helps people so that they're feeling like they're getting their time back. And I do think we are quite open with that at Trinity McQueen, and I think maybe I did, and that was before I even joined, so I can't even say it's just me kind of, you know, beating that drum sort of thing as somebody who works flexibly as a mum of 2 boys and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't think
And I would agree with you.
Liz, I was just going to invite Charlene to respond.
Yeah,
Is that okay?
I was just about to say, I don't even think that's specifically industry related. I think that's quite company specific, because I know, similar to Sarah, I work at Schlesinger. My job's completely remote. I do all of my school runs. If I need to go to do a sports day, I can go and do that. You know, there's not that sort of pressure applied, and that's really helped me. And I do think COVID has sort of a lot to do with that, because I'm seeing that happening more and more. So I don't know if it's that we need to apply some sort of industry standard where we sort of apply this, and that may help. But I definitely wouldn't say that's the case everywhere, because I feel as if my work-life balance has improved tenfold to sort of what it was a couple of years ago.
It's really interesting. What specifically made, if you had to point to one policy, one thing that made the difference there, Charlene, what would you say?
For me, it's been me working remotely. So I go into the office once a month, a couple of times a month, more if I sort of want to see my colleagues or clients, or but there's sort of the expectation, I guess, for us to sort of go in once a month so we can all get some face time. But we do other things to, you know, foster sort of a good working environment. So we have a morning meeting where we all come on, see each other, we speak about things that have nothing to do with work, just so we're sort of getting that time and it's not just work. But yeah, the remote working is something that obviously before COVID, a lot of people were really reluctant to do. And then they realised that their results weren't actually affected by some people being at home. Obviously, for some people, they like to be in, and I think they should have the option to be if they want to be, because not everybody works well from home. But personally, it works so well for me, and I'm so happy that I'm able to do that.
Good. Well, I'm glad you've had a good experience there, and that's really positive. So, Brooke, did you want to come next? And I know Liz, you wanted to talk too. So, Brooke next, and then Liz.
Yeah, sure. Am I on? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Ipsos is a big organisation. We do flexible working. We have people who are part-time. We have people who job share. We have people who start late, early, finish, all the different variations you can imagine. We've got people who, you know, we've got a couple of people who live in Scotland and come down once a month. I think there are 2 things I wanted to add to this discussion, though. One is the fact that in some ways things have become better. Because I think whereas we had time off in lieu and all of these things in place before COVID, I think the really significant thing that's changed, which is better for some people, possibly people in my life stage, and possibly worse for others, is the reduction in travel. So whereas most of our work is international, there used to be a huge amount of travel internationally. There was also a huge amount of travel around the country. Obviously, there's less face-to-face work. There's less international travel. It's not just a function of going digital. It's also a function of clients signing up to sustainability charters. We're trying to reduce our carbon footprint as a business, and so are our clients. So it's not going to, I don't think this is going to reverse. And I think I found that for a lot of the mothers, one of the challenging parts was visiting your client in Switzerland.
Yeah.
You know, not just field work, but all of that travel eats into, you know, you can plan for all the other stuff. You can ask younger people to do the face-to-face field work, or people who don't have caring responsibilities, perhaps. But that reduction in travel, I think, has helped significantly.
Interesting. Thank you so much for that. And Liz, do come in.
Yeah, no, I would say exactly the same to Charlene, Sarah and Brooke. I agree with you. It's improved massively for all sorts of reasons. That said, there are still companies that are not nearly as flexible. So, you know, you're 3 great examples, but not everyone is like that. And the other thing I just wanted to bring up, which is slightly different, which is a lot of women returning to work are not that confident. So it's not just about improving flexible hours and less travel and things. It's also thinking that the profession has progressed very, very quickly in recent years. And if they have been out of work for 3 or 4 years, the techniques that they used then are often not the ones that are used now. So also there needs to be something done about just encouraging them, really supporting them, making them feel that this is something that they can do, because they don't have as much confidence.
Understood. I wanted to briefly mention a couple of things. So a couple of people in the chat saying, you know, fathers require flexible work too. So just saying, from somebody out there. As somebody has to do nursery, drop off and pick up 3 times a week, I can stand with those people. Secondly, I saw on LinkedIn quite recently an agency sharing a standard slide from their proposal deck, which had a client agency charter about how they expected to be treated and the hours which they expected their colleagues to work. So that thing around burnout and having people responding in reasonable timescales, and trying to set a new norm and frame it in a certain way, which I thought was brave, but well needed and quite a kind of bold move to make. There's several people who wanted to talk. The one that was top of my list, I think, was Tim. So Tim, did you have a question? Do you want to unmute yourself and sort of build to our flow?
Yeah, hi, I'm a exec director at Verve, so mainly digital, which is interesting because that popped up. But I think there's been really interesting discussion, both in terms of bringing on kind of hard to reach groups, be it different ethnicities, be it older qualitative researchers. But I guess my question is, how do we find these people? Because it's interesting, Liz, that you mentioned that kind of you see an ageism in the industry, but I don't see any older qualitative researchers or any older researchers really applying. So how do we access those in a better way? And similarly, trying to get non-graduate researchers, if anyone's got any tips in terms of apprenticeships or where we can go to find those people, then I'd appreciate that, because we're going to be running schemes soon. So understanding how to get those people into the industry, I'd be really keen to hear that.
Fine, well, I'll put it to the panel first. Did anybody want to come in on those points?
In terms of getting some people into the industry that are non-grad, I know somebody mentioned earlier that the MRS are doing the apprenticeship scheme. Colour Research have been working quite closely with the MRS as well on that scheme to sort of try and tackle at the same time the issue of non-grads and also people from ethnic backgrounds. So that, I think, would be a sort of a good place to start, and I could catch up with you offline, Tim, on that.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that'd be fine. In terms of age, I'm not sure.
So
somebody else has ideas.
I agree with apprenticeships, but you can also talk direct to schools. I know organisations that literally go out to local schools and talk directly to them. In terms of age, I guess it's working, and actually this applies to a lot of the other groups, so things like neurodiversity and so on. it's either working with things, I was going to say charities, and then thinking that's not relevant to age. Charities are probably more appropriate to things like physical or neurodiversity, but also recruitment consultants, because the reality is that I'm sure, I mean, that I know there are other recruiters at this meeting, we'll all know of older qualitative researchers who'd like to get back into work. But I suspect, on the whole, we don't approach you as we should, because we're just under the impression that you want a round peg for a round hole, and we're a bit worried about pushing the boundaries. And I think that's where the relationship is important, that we get to know you better, so that we're pushing the boundaries to get you to consider other things without you thinking, oh, you're charlatans.
Jumping in here for just conscious of time, but for two reasons. So that neatly aligns with the next theme about agency recruiter dynamics and how there's sometimes a mismatch of expectations and what we could do better. Second reason, Sarah was shaking her head slightly when you made that point there around the expectation that you might not want an older person to come and apply for a role. So Sarah, picking on your body language here, do tell me why you were shaking your head. Tell me a bit more about why you were shaking your head.
I don't know if it was because I was new to the sector. Like I said, I'd worked in creative agencies before, ad agencies, all that sort of stuff. So when I came, for me, it was just as much of a learning experience around market research. So I was just really open to just chat to anybody and everybody. And actually, a lot of the people that we were talking to were, which I've always found the shift from client side to agency, normally they go the other way, but I've had quite, some great conversations with people who are going from client side to agency because they want that variation which you can offer in an agency. Again, so one of those is nearer 50 than nearer the 18 category sort of thing. So somebody who's wanting to go into agency life for the first time. We've had job offers out to people and acceptances who are coming from, because we're very much focusing on, similarly to Brooke with regards to the sector expertise, if education is a massive sector that we want to go after or is part of our growth plan, then we've been looking for people who work within insight roles, within education, these massive partnerships, colleges, all of that sort of stuff. So I would like to think we've been really open-minded in where people have come from. And I've just been interested to just chat to anybody and everybody rather than just kind of looking at them from a piece of paper sort of thing. I love chatting to people, so I'm quite happy to make time to have those exploratory conversations with people. So I would say we aren't like that at Trinity McQueen.
And I don't think the industry is, if you're talking about people that are under 50, I'm talking about people that are in their late 50s or early 60s. And I think that's where it really starts to kick in. And we're all supposed to work till we're 67.
A bit longer if you've seen my pension statement. But anyway, I wanted to just pick up. So you mentioned the point there around, okay, well, I've got a feeling that the agency might not want it. And there's a sort of theme here about the relationship between a recruiter and the agency they work with. So I wanted to move on from Liz and Sarah and ask the other two panelists, what does a great agency recruiter relationship look like? So what are the different combinations of things that make that an effective working relationship?
Good question. I don't know. I mean, I think we've got lots of good relationships with recruiters, and I think, it's Liz has just highlighted a point to me that I hadn't really considered actually, because before you made that comment, Liz, I would have said that, the great relationship we have with our recruiters is when we're really clear on what we want and they're really clear on only giving us CVs that fit that profile. And actually, as you've just pointed out, that's going to leave some, people out of the list. So I don't know, maybe I've got that one wrong, but one of the challenges that we've had for a long time has been, finding people who have big agency experience. There's only so many big qual agencies, so there aren't that many people on the market who have big agency experience. And then moving on from there, as I said, we've got so many roles to fill and so much growth and so many sector specialist areas that actually we've been going well beyond qualitative research, well beyond market research, and hiring journalists and hiring semi-editions and hiring people from, all sorts of different areas, which provides challenges, obviously, for sort of integration and getting them up to speed on the rest of the business, but actually has been super exciting bringing people in from other areas. In fact, planners, we've hired, I can't even tell you how many planners who, as you say, Liz, do tend to be sort of 50 plus, actually, the planners that have come to us. But yeah, so I don't know what the answer is. Maybe they should tell us when it's a good one. Maybe the recruiter should tell us. There's a few on the line.
Really interesting. And Charlene, did you want to come in at that point?
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking it's obviously having the good knowledge of the company and thinking outside the box in some cases. I mean, I know recruiters who, you know, the company had a certain type of person they were looking for. Upon speaking to somebody else, they thought, oh, actually, they may be a good fit because they have this and they have that. I mean, it's also, if you are trying to increase the sort of age of your workforce, then is the recruiter necessarily the best person to go to? I think somebody said in the chat here that they wouldn't necessarily even go to a recruiter based on their sort of base in life. So yeah, I guess then it would be looking at other places to get to people, whether it's through network, whether it's through word of mouth. There are sort of different ways, but it is difficult.
Okay, fab. Just very conscious of time, and as ever, this is such a broad, wide-ranging topic. It's hard to do it justice and hard to cover off all the themes. But I wanted to kind of move towards a sort of closing theme before we go into our breakout rooms. So I wanted to just ask everybody on the panel, you know, in terms of thinking about the future, thinking about solutions. If you had a magic wand and you could wave it, and what one thing would you change about our industry? Around this issue, what one thing would you change and why? So I might pick on Brooke first, if you don't mind, Brooke. You were last when I started out. You're first when I'm concluding.
Oh God, one thing that I would change. I mean, there's the impossible things. I would like in some ways to go back to a land of more travel. I think there was a lot of excitement that we don't necessarily have in the job at the moment. For some of the juniors coming in, it's not quite the job that it used to be, and so it can be harder to kind of sell the excitement and chaos and international travel and all of that. It's changed, but I suppose for me it's trying to work out what is the new, you know, what is it about the new world of qual, and me really kind of being able to articulate that so that we can find the right people. Because I think what we've seen, particularly when you start to do less international travel and more, say, online, maybe like a long-term community, or even just, you know, even just community work full stop, it's a different profile of person who's going to find that really fulfilling and really exciting and really interesting. And I think we're having to sort of pivot who we're looking for, because I think it's a different role and we can't fit the, you know, the researchers of before into what the role is becoming. So I think the thing I'm looking for is working out what that role is and how to articulate that and find the right match of people.
Really interesting. We're aiming at a moving target, number one, I think, to summarize. And the second thing is the job, the travel, the kind of international, that lovely, rewarding catharsis, excitement has been taken out, and the job has been flattened a bit, sort of spending our time online slightly. So to reflect that back
but
to you,
perhaps other things are appealing, right? You know, more people who've got more of a data and analytical mind, people who like getting into curation and SIA analysis and just different skill sets, right?
Thank you. Really interesting. So again, considering my reverse order, I think Sarah is next. So Sarah, do you mind telling us? So wave your magic wand. What would you change? What one thing would you change?
I think probably over the next 5 years or so, it needs to be very much around an open-mindedness about where people come from into the industry. We are watchers of people, and there's lots of people and lots of types of people, so we need to be reflective of that, I think, of the cultures in which we live. So I think it is that open-mindedness around who we're going out there, who we're speaking to, who we're recruiting to the industry, and not trying to find a round peg for a round hole. Maybe find a square peg and, you know, round them off to make them for that perfect fit, and have that open-mindedness, really.
Very good. So I see you picking up on Liz's analogy there, and Liz is next in my order of asking. So again, same question to you, Liz.
I would broaden the pool of talent. If I'm allowed a second thing, I also think that qualitative research needs to think about how it sells itself better. You have far more competition for talent than you had 15 years ago, and you have to respond to that.
Very good. Thank you for that. Yeah, ever the entrepreneur, getting two for the price of one there, pushing the boundaries. Thank you, Liz. Charlene, I'm going to finish with you. So wave your magic wand. What's the one thing?
so many things, but one of them for me would be people not hiring in their likeness. So a lot of the time people like to say they're looking for somebody that's a cultural fit, that fits in with their organisation, and what they really mean is somebody that's like them, someone that looks like them, someone the same age as them, someone that they can go down to the pub with and have banter with, but that isn't necessarily the best person to get into your organisation. And I think if people stopped doing that, then they would be able to tackle a lot of the issues that they say they have around equity and diversity.
I'm conscious we all have toddlers to put to bed and dinners to eat. So the first theme, which Oliver very nicely chaired in a lovely breakout room, was around are we getting the best talent? It was another very broad conversation with many multifarious strands, and it's going to be a great challenge for Ollie to sum it up in 3 sentences. So over to you, Oliver.
I'm going to do it in 4 because I already themed my responses. And the first one, I think, was the response to ageism. And there was another person who gave us the perspective that ageism perhaps comes from clients before it comes from agencies. So I think that's an interesting angle. We also touched on pay, which fundamentally sits at the heart of a lot of this. And again, another interesting perspective that maybe suggests that the business model that we have isn't actually the best one at the moment, and the ones that are the consultancies are probably driving up pay for the whole of the industry, actually, and maybe we need to recheck our business models on that front.
Was that the retainer model, wasn't it? So a retained fee model. Yeah.
And consultancies are charging in a very different way. There's also an element that I think we'll all agree on as well, is that the industry isn't particularly seen in the wider world as something that everyone grows up and aspires towards, and maybe we need to PR this industry a little bit better. And then the final point, there were several comments on, which is how we successfully bring people into the industry and bring people into agencies. And there was one very interesting example of someone who'd switched career, used the MRS apprenticeship scheme to find an agency to go to, and had a very successful transition from one industry to another. So I think that's a big round of applause on the MRS doing it that way. So those were the 4 things that I themed from our discussion.
That's right. It was the mentorship scheme, wasn't it?
Mentorship.
That's right.
Yeah.
Getting our mixed metaphors there. Right, brilliant. Thank you. Hopefully Luella's taking very copious notes as well as us. We're going to, Luella's laughing at me now because she knows it's theming all this will be a challenge. On to theme 2, which was Ella and Charlene looking at the EDI agenda. Ella, are you okay, or do you want to nominate somebody?
I mean, if anyone from my group wants to go, feel free, but I'm equally happy to try and summarise.
Go for it, Ella. You were taking all the notes.
Okay. So EDI, I mean, we talked a lot, we had a lot of discussions on various different people with different backgrounds, so a lot about neurodivergence and neurodiversity, and so lots there. But essentially it sort of came down to one overall big point, which is agencies, whether research agencies or fieldwork agencies, need to think in a sort of inclusive design way, I suppose, and build in mechanisms to support many different types of people and ensure that it's an inclusive environment overall, so that anyone can come and feel comfortable and don't necessarily have to announce. We talked about, people not necessarily knowing if they have they might not have a diagnosis of autism, for example, but may need extra support in order to best function. So designing, from the premise that everyone has different needs, and to accommodate needs and be as welcoming as possible is sort of the one key action, and that should address lots of different types of needs and people from different backgrounds as well. So that was the big point there. And then we talked about this point of a non experience-led CV, which everyone went, yeah, great idea. And we got cut off. There was 10 seconds to go suddenly, as I was furiously trying to list down the qualities that a good qualitative researcher or even field worker would need. But we got to sort of curiosity, creative thinking, an interest in people. I did that one just now by myself, but generally these were some core skills. But also there was examples of an agency that used to only recruit teachers, because apparently teachers have a lot of, so thinking, I guess, laterally about other parallel industries or jobs that maybe have crossover with core research, and looking a bit more broadly about filling some of those mid to senior roles with people who have exchange, other types of relevant experience.
Brilliant, thanks so much. Claire mentioned she came over from the arts, which interestingly saw research having far greater salaries than the arts. So it was a great selling point. I know our agency's recruited at least one ex-teacher, I'm thinking one in particular, an ex-maths teacher who was an absolutely superb recruit and stayed with us for 5 or 6 years and has gone on to do great things. So it can be done, people. Right, theme 3 was meant to be Judy and Liz talking about agency recruiter dynamics. I believe you might have done another topic.
Yes,
Judy,
we did the same topic as Ollie.
I think I might have to take responsibility for that. I got into my head that theme 1 was room 1. I'm a very simple creature, sorry.
It's absolutely fine. We're blaming Ollie entirely.
And I wasn't in the room, so I couldn't be involved.
What I can do is adapt this to fit the theme we were supposed to be discussing, because actually we covered some of the ground that you'd already covered. I'd say the 4 key outputs were, at the moment, there's a very condensed recruitment process because this was mentioned by one person in particular. We have people who arrive, you have a couple of people you see, you want to meet them again or take them through a second round of interviews because you're not quite sure which is which. And before you know it, they've gone somewhere else. And that's something I'm sure, Liz, if you've been in our group, you could have commented on. There's such a need for researchers that you can't spend too much time on the process or they disappear somewhere else, which puts us in a bit of a sort of, hotbed of having to make very snappy decisions. And that's something that maybe agencies and recruiters can talk about early on in the process to maybe ease the way. We talked about finding talent in other places, just as Ella mentioned, so maybe going into places like the arts or hospitality, where people are used to long hours, hard work, and not enormous salaries, but might find this more, fulfilling for other reasons. We talked about a little bit about people working from home, not actually being able to find out what exactly they're good at. So they might be qualitative researchers, but are they really good at something very specific like client relationships or moderation or insight mining, and when they're at middle level, whether we can do something to make sure that we understand more about those individuals, particularly if they're not coming into the office every day. From the recruiters, can the recruiters help us to understand their sort of leanings in a bit more detail so that we can channel them into the right parts of our businesses so that we don't lose them after 6 months because they're not happy. And I think, unless anyone else can remember anything else we talked about. Oh, the other one was flexibility, because older people like the flexibility. Older people who have become freelancers like the flexibility of freelancing and therefore don't want to commit to full time. And people who are younger, particularly the millennials who we've heard from in other AQR sessions, really appreciate a work-life balance. And some in the middle have children and therefore need to be flexible. Have we got anybody, said Jessica, who can actually just do the job full-time 5 days a week, which is what some agencies really crying out for, because otherwise, you just can't get the work done properly, and that's a big issue that was raised.
Thank you so much. So Lucy was looking at theme 4. So Lucy, do you want to come in?
Yeah, so we were looking at the candidate experience, and we were very much addressing head on the fact that there is a talent shortage. And it's a candidates market at the moment. So we talked about how actually we should be flipping the process slightly on its head. And that first stage of interview shouldn't really be an interview at all. It should be an opportunity to give candidates a chance to find out more about the company. So it should be the company selling itself to the candidates. Ideally, it wouldn't even be with directors. It would be with peers, and it would be finding out more about the reality of life, at that agency. So painting, very visual picture. And in fact, let the recruitment agency, do the role of the tick box exercise. They can make sure they've got the right skill set. That's not what the first interview should be at all about. We also talked about the need to actually be really honest about the role at this stage, and don't sugarcoat it. It is what it is, it's that sort of attitude. So paint a true reflective picture of what work life will be like at that agency.
And I think you've touched on it, Judy, but don't make that process too long or you're just going to lose candidates. You've got to make it short. Ideally, you know, isn't it great to be in a room with somebody so they get a true sense of you and the agency and the environment, the culture. So hopefully in the future we'll see more of a return, you know, to face-to-face interviews. It's not all done on Teams. And final point, because I'm conscious of time, but it's Chloe Marks made the point that what we should be doing is making sure we get feedback from the candidates on how they found the experience. So candidates who don't choose us are particularly useful, aren't they, in finding out, you know, why didn't they take the job offer? You know, how was the process for them? And we're probably not particularly good currently at doing that. So perhaps something we should think about. Okay.
Wow. Thank you so much. Very concise, and I really appreciate the color-coded books above your head. Most relaxing, most relaxing. So finally, over to Brooke. So Brooke has 2 minutes to tell us about the future / solutions, which is a very narrow set of recommendations she can come forward with. So very easy one for you, Brooke. So do
you say that? I think Caroline was taking the
Caroline,
notes.
Sorry.
But I missed the timing, so we didn't pass it out. But I think our overwhelming thing in lots of things we talked about was coming back to the how do we articulate the benefits and the narrative around what we do. We didn't have complete solutions, but we talked about researchers researching themselves. So, you know, but not just young people or mid people or what have you, because they might not know what they're missing, what they don't know. So looking across, more concrete than that we didn't get to. But some of the things, you know, how do we combat some of the lack of excitement? But maybe it's us that's seeking the excitement. But as Brooke said before, are we, you know, who do we need to talk to? How do we articulate what we do? Even because, you know, other people said it's not the highest paying industry. Some thoughts about, are we enabling a problem by letting people go and freelance earlier on? And Ipsos are not doing that, but that reduces the pool. Looking outside recruitment to see what other people do, but I think they were the key things we turned around, and some of the things that, you know, suddenly CVs have dried up and that sort of thing, but that's not a solution. So I think our question was, how do we articulate what we offer? Is that fair, team?
Get back to me notes.
Yeah. Fine. Right. Okay. So I'm just going to draw the strands together now, and I have about 90 seconds to do so. So. Do keep us honest. Our 2-stage processes now is to go through and make some notes and assign some actions against these. So based on what we as the AQR are going to do at an industry level, but also some recommendations both for recruiters, agencies and brands as well. So we're going to be doing that. We're also going to be writing it up and sharing it probably in brief. Is that right, Luella? If not the website, it'll be shared in a public forum.
Well, we can discuss that tomorrow. Whether it's good or not, I think.
Okay, fine. Okay, we'll be reported back, but do expect to receive feedback from us on what we are going to do as a result. The final thing I want to say is just thank you. So thank you for coming along when we should have been having a nice glass of wine in person. Thank you for spending your evening talking and sharing as a group. I have learned a huge amount. Thank you to the audience and everybody participating, but thank you mostly to our wonderful panelists who were full of charisma, full of chat and full of great contributions. So I want to just say thank you very much. So Charlene, Liz, Sarah and Brooke. So thank you.